And we will start the screen share. All right. We are in the Greco-Roman background, and we're looking at the religions of the Greco-Roman Empire. We looked at emperor worship, and now we're briefly going to look at the mystery religions. We've noted that the religions of the first century, the religions of the Greco-Roman pantheon and emperor worship, didn't satisfy the deep longing that mankind had for freedom from guilt, the security of communion with God, and the assurance of life after death. And into that vacuum came the mystery religions. The mystery religions were Oriental in origin. The cult of Cybele came from Asia Minor. The cult of Isis, the nature goddess and wife and sister of Osiris, the god of the underworld and husband and brother of Isis, and Serapis, which combined the attributes of Osiris and Apis from Egypt, Mithra from Persia, Dionysus from Greek. All of these were gods of the Orient. The mystery religions differed from each other, so there wasn't one single mystery theology, but there were some similarities. The mystery religions appealed to the emotions rather than the intellect. They gave an experience rather than an intellectual argument or rigid code of ethics. For example, the initiation ceremony, one of the initiation ceremonies involved a person being placed under a grill on top of which a bull was slaughtered. The blood ran down through the grill and drenched the person, cleansing his sins and giving him energizing power. He emerged crying that he was reborn for eternity.
Excuse me, sir.
Yes.
Sir, Rachel wants to come and she's waiting in the room.
Oh, I am sorry. Okay. 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 Most of the initiatory rites of the cults are not known in detail because the members were sworn to secrecy. There was a preparation of fasting and cleansing. The stories of the cults dealt with the dying and rising of a god, and it is believed that the rites sought to symbolize that. There was probably a stage at which the person passed through a great darkness and came into a dazzling light, typifying death and resurrection, so that he felt he had achieved a reunion with the deity. Sometimes the person partook of a sacred meal as part of the rite. Now, the Apostle Paul used some of the terminology that they used in the cults, but he did not get his theology from the mystery cults. Back 100 years ago, it was popular to say that Paul was influenced by the mystery cults, that that's where he got his theology. But that pretty decisively was shown not to be true. There was a book, The Origin of Paul's Religion by J. Gresham Machen, in which he decisively showed that Paul was not influenced by the mystery religions. Now, we have a section on the occult, demonology, magic, and astrology. And in order to conserve on time, we are not going to go into those. You can look at that on on your PowerPoints. And so we are just going to go right on through there. And we're going to go to philosophy. Philosophy has been defined as the attempt to correlate all existing knowledge about the universe into systematic form and to integrate human experience with it. The philosophies were based on reason, not on revelation. Over the centuries, the philosophies have impacted the church to a greater or lesser degree, but they were not part of the original teaching of the Bible. The writers of the Bible used terms from the philosophies, but they didn't get their content of the teaching from human philosophies. We're only going to mention a couple of these. The first is Platonism. Plato was a pupil of Socrates and lived in the 4th century before Christ. His philosophy taught that for everything on earth, there was a perfect idea. The real is the world of heavenly ideas, and everything on earth is only a shadow of the real. This idea world has an objective existence, real existence, and the material world is only a dim reflection of it. This concept led to Platonic dualism, the idea that the unseen world is good and the material world is evil. So the goal was to escape this material world. The way to escape comes from reflection, meditation, and asceticism. Salvation comes through knowledge, while ignorance is sin. Let me just go ahead and skip down here to a video about Plato's cave. And in this teaching, it pretty much summarizes Plato's philosophy. I'm going to have to click the sound here.
Imagine prisoners that have spent their entire lives chained deep inside a cave. They have been chained so that they cannot see behind themselves, and they are forced to stare endlessly at the cave wall in front of them. Behind them, a fire is burning, and between the prisoners and the fire is a raised walkway. Now imagine that each day a menagerie of objects crosses the walkway. Animals, and people carrying their wares to market. Their shapes create an intricate shadow play on the wall in front of the prisons. This is the only world that the prisoners have ever known. The shadows and the echoes of closing objects. Now, imagine a prisoner is released. After some time adjusting to the blinding light, the free prisoner will begin to experience the world outside of the cave for the very first time. And it's like nothing he could have ever imagined.
Excuse me, sir.
His perception of the world, the man will of course return to his friends to share his incredible discoveries. But the prisoners cannot recognize their own friend. Yet is all things do. His voice is a distorted echo.
Sir Galen?
Is a grotesque shadow. They cannot understand his fantastic stories of the world outside of the cave. To them, it will never exist. This, of course, does not make the world outside of the cave any less real.
All right. With the pictures, I don't know what the problem is here. And I may have to just to go back to using my other computer, which is a better computer than this new one that I got solely for teaching so that I could use a pencil on the screen, but I may have to go back. But did you get the gist of this parable of Plato's cave? It's told in detail here on PowerPoint.
Yeah, unfortunately, doctor, the sound was really poor. We couldn't understand. I couldn't understand much of it.
Oh, okay. Yeah, well, I will have to do something about that, I guess. His story of the cave is that there are prisoners who are in the cave and they have never gotten out. They were born there. The only thing they can see is what is in front of them. Their hands are in shackles, their feet. They can't even look around and see what's behind them. All there is a wall in front of them. Above and behind them, there is a low wall, and animals and people walk on that wall. Behind that wall, back farther behind them, is the entrance to the cave, and there is a fire back there. The prisoners can't look back there and see all those things. All they can see is what is on the wall. For them, what is on the wall is reality. They know nothing else. So a person comes walking on the wall behind them, and the light is flickering behind them and casting a flickering shadow on the wall. That's all they know. An animal comes on the wall, and all they can see is that this image of the animal on the wall, but it's not distinct. For the prisoners, the wall is reality. But let's say one of the prisoners escapes. He's able to get away and get outside the cave. Now, at first, of course, everything is going to be really bright. He won't be able to see anything because his eyes have to adjust to the light. But eventually his eyes adjust and he sees all kinds of wonderful things. You know, he sees animals, he sees birds, he sees a lake, he sees the blue sky, the trees. All of this is something that he never dreamed was possible. Well, what is he going to do? He's going to go back into the cave and tell everybody about what is outside. So he goes back in and he tells them about this world that he has experienced. How do the people respond? They say, oh, that is wonderful. We would like to experience that too. No, they think he's crazy and maybe even dangerous, and they may want to kill him for saying such weird kinds of things. Well, for Plato, this is a reflection of reality. The normal person is like a prisoner in a cave. Their reality is only what they see on the wall, which is a dim reflection of the true reality of the world of ideas. The person who escapes and goes out and experiences this new reality is the philosopher. So Plato believed that everything here on earth is a dim reflection of the real in the heavens, the real world in the heavens. So down here we have, for example, chairs, but there is the real perfect chair in the heavens, in the world of ideas. We have other things down here. Everything down here is simply a reflection, a dim reflection of the real. Now, this might sound as sort of weird, you know, nobody could believe that kind of thing, but this had a huge impact on the church in church history. Let's go down and look at the next philosophy that we're going to look at, and that is Gnosticism. Gnosticism was based on Platonic philosophy, and Platonic philosophy believed in what we call dualism, that which is spiritual, which is unseen, is good, And that which is material, that is that you can touch it, you can feel it, is either neutral, of no account, or is actually evil. Now let's look at Gnosticism. The form of Gnosticism, of which we know the most, grew out of Platonism. Its name comes from the Greek word for knowledge, gnosis, because it promised salvation through knowledge. Salvation comes to the elite who receive some esoteric knowledge not available to the rest of mankind. Gnosticism built upon the dualism of Plato, saying that the material was evil and the spiritual good. It posited a pure, totally spiritual, impersonal God. Between it and the earth was a whole network of emanations or eons, each a little inferior to the other, that is less spiritual and more material, until finally the last one created the material world. That, they said, was the God of the Old Testament. But salvation comes from renouncing the material world and seeking the invisible world, the spiritual world. Gnostics deny the true humanity of Christ. For them, he was either a very high eon, a purely spiritual being who came down to earth but never was incarnated as a man. He either came upon the man Jesus after his birth and left before his crucifixion, or he didn't have a real body. It was a phantom body and not a real body of flesh and blood. Gnosticism was totally anti-Jewish. It totally rejects the Old Testament. In fact, some Gnostics had a reversal of ethics. Since the evil God of the Old Testament, they would say, gave the Ten Commandments, they felt it their duty to do the opposite. So if the Ten Commandments say, do not murder, they would say, murder, you ought to murder. If it said, do not commit adultery, they would say, you ought to commit adultery. They would reverse the teachings, the ethics of the Old Testament. Also, the heroes of the Old Testament, for them, were the bad guys. And the bad guys of the Old Testament were, for them, the heroes. So let me see if I can and try to illustrate this. Well, I'm not getting anything here. Let me see if I can do it with my mouse. Okay, here we go. This represents the supreme God, the God that is totally, purely spiritual. Now, from him, we would have what we call eons, lesser beings that come from God. And there is a whole network of these, thousands, maybe millions, that come from God. And each one, as you go farther from God, becomes a little less spiritual and a little more material. You might have guessed that art was not my major in college. But way down at the bottom, you finally come to a being that is so unspiritual and so material that he can create a material universe. This, according to the Gnostics, is the God of the Old Testament. Okay, who was Jesus then? Jesus was sent from the great supreme God down to the earth to rescue us from the God of the Old Testament. So Jesus did not actually have a material body. And like we just said, he either seemed to have a material body, but it wasn't really material. Excuse me, that belief is what is called Docetism. Or he came upon the human Jesus after the incarnation, stayed upon him, and then left him before the crucifixion. So that was Gnosticism's belief. Basically, it believes that the spiritual is good and the material is bad. So if you can touch it, if you can see it, if you can feel it, if you can hear it, then it is inferior. Now, does this idea come through in the New Testament at all? And I believe that we have a response to this kind of teaching in the New Testament, which we would call a proto-Gnosticism. See if it'll let me go to the next slide. Okay. Oh, it's keeping it up here. So let me go back here and see if I can use the eraser. I wasn't expecting it to go from slide to slide. So there must be a way of working with that I don't know about. Okay, there is a kind of proto-Gnosticism. This means an early form of Gnosticism in New Testament days, and it is reflected in the books of Colossians, 1 Corinthians, 1 Timothy, and 1 John, among others. An interesting thing about Gnosticism is that it can result in two opposite ethical stands: asceticism and licentiousness. When you see the mind as being superior to the body, on the one hand, on the left side here, we have a libertine ethic. It's characterized by licentiousness and self-expression. It says basically, since the body is of no account, it doesn't matter how you use it. Do with it what you want. The other response is on the right side, the rigorist ethic. It leads to asceticism and self-denial. And it says, since the body is evil, repress it or do not gratify it. So we have two opposite ways of dealing with this idea that the mind is superior to the body, or the spiritual is superior to the material. One side, the libertine ethic, says, do whatever you want. It's okay. Doesn't matter what you do with your body. Your body doesn't matter at all. The other one says, your body is evil and you need to repress it. Don't give it any pleasure. So deny it any kind of pleasure. And in church history, we have seen that this is the way that it works out. The church for centuries has been impacted by this kind of thing. Now, if you look at 1 Corinthians, you'll see the libertine ethic in 1 Corinthians chapter 6, where men in the church are going to prostitutes. You'll see the rigorist ethic in chapter 7, the very next thing, where you have people in the church saying, any kind of sexual experience is wrong, even in marriage. So the chapter 6 is libertine ethic, chapter 7 is rigorist ethic. And the church has been impacted by this over the centuries. How many of you have picked up the idea that the body is evil? That physical pleasure is evil? At least that it's not very good, you know. And if you have physical pleasure, then you're probably not very spiritual and not probably pleasing God very much. But you see, that's not scripture. The Bible delights in God's creation. The creation is fallen, but it's not evil. It's not inherently evil. And it will be redeemed. When we are redeemed totally, creation also will be redeemed. So we are looking forward to that day. There are those who really have been impacted by this. I think it probably has some parallels in Buddhism and other religions that attempt to repress the body and only live for the spiritual. All right, do you have questions or comments here before we go on? I've been throwing a lot of stuff at you here. So do you have questions, comments? Everybody understand? Have I left you in the dust? Left you far behind? Okay, well, we'll go on. Okay, just for the sake of time, I'm not going to go into the other philosophies, but you have this on your PowerPoint. And so I'm going to leave up to you to get this from the PowerPoint. Probably the one that would have the greatest impact upon Scripture in the New Testament would be Stoicism, because there are some seeming parallels between Stoicism and Christianity, but actually they are far, far apart. Cynicism, skepticism. All right, Christianity and the Roman world. What was the response of the Gentile world to Christianity? In our world today, especially the Western, it's not considered all that big a deal. I mean, you certainly don't go kill somebody because they have a different religion. But since religion was integrated into the life of the first century, being a Christian set a person apart socially as well as religiously. Religion in the first century was polytheistic. If you were a polytheist, you could always add another god to your list. And some people added Yahweh and Jesus to their list. We see that especially coming out in magic, which we skipped a little earlier. It was believed in secular society that the gods were appeased by giving sacrifices. If they were appeased, then bad things wouldn't happen to you. If they were not appeased, then bad things would happen to you. So if somebody refused to sacrifice to the gods and something bad happened, it would be the fault of the person who refused to sacrifice. So the well-being of the entire community depended on appeasing the gods. Now, where did this put the Christians? It brought on persecution. Because if you were not doing your part to appease the gods, then you were wrecking the lives of the other people in the city. And so they were persecuted. Now, there are other societies today where very much the religion and society are intermingled. They are not secular societies, they are religious societies. If you go to Thailand, for example, you will see all the religious symbolism in the government. When you go into the airport in Bangkok, you feel like you're going into a Buddhist temple. And you see there are shrines to the king, but it's all Buddhist. And so that is the way it was in the first century. Religion and the government and all were all integrated together. This is the kind of world into which Christianity came. Was the world ripe for Christianity? When Christianity came, did everybody just say, oh, this is what we've been looking for, and welcome it? I want to read you something from N.T. Wright, and it's on Moodle, and you can look at it there. I think he does a really good job in addressing this. He says, Christianity did not spread by magic. It is sometimes suggested that the world was, so to speak, ready for Christianity. Stoicism was too lofty and dry. Popular paganism, metaphysically incredible and morally bankrupt. Mystery religions, dark and forbidding. Judaism, law-bound and introverted. And Christianity burst on the scene as the great answer to the questions everyone was asking. There's a grain of truth to this picture, but it hardly does justice to historical reality. Christianity summoned proud pagans to face torture and death out of loyalty to a Jewish villager who had been executed by Rome. Christianity advocated a love which cut across racial boundaries. It sternly forbade sexual immorality, the exposure of children, and a great many other things which the pagan world took for granted. And let me just add that the exposure of children was, in my opinion, similar to abortion today. Except we kill children before they're born, not after. And the difference between the secular view and the Christian view is a matter of worldviews. Choosing to become a Christian was not an easy or natural thing for the average pagan. A Jew who converted might well be regarded as a national traitor. Even slaves, who might be supposed to have less to lose than others, and hence to appreciate an elevation of status through conversion, might face a cost. As we saw, Pliny, remember we read the letter of Pliny to Trajan last time. Pliny thought it normal to interrogate with torture slave girls who happened to be part of the early Christian movement. We have no reason to suppose that interrogation under torture was any easier for a young woman in the 2nd century than in the 20th or 21st. Why then did Christianity spread? Because early Christians believed that what they had found to be true was true for the whole world. The impetus to mission sprang from the very heart of early Christian conviction. If we know anything about early Christian praxis at a non or subliterary level, it is that the early Christians engaged in mission to both Jews and Gentiles. The irresistible expansion of Christian faith in the Mediterranean world during the first 150 years is the scarlet thread running through any history of primitive Christianity. This missionary activity was not an addendum to a faith that was basically about something else. For example, a new existential self-awareness, as Bultmann might say. Christianity was never more itself than in the launching of the world mission. Justin tells of his meeting with an old man who talked to him about Jesus. Pliny speaks of the poison of Christianity spreading into villages and countryside. Ignatius finds churches wherever he goes throughout Asia Minor. Tacitus, in the tone of voice of one who has come across a dead rat in his water tank, comments that all the worst features of world culture find their way to Rome sooner or later. And if we look for a moment at the canonical writings, we find them full of mission. Matthew's Jesus instructs the disciples to make disciples and baptize all the world. Luke's Jesus commissions his followers to go to Jerusalem, Judea, Samaria, and the ends of the earth. And John's Jesus says, As the Father sent me, so I send you. The story of Acts is the story, or rather a story, of early Christian mission. And whatever we may think about the portrait of Paul in Acts, the letters confirm that not only he, but a good many other Christians, in some cases holding significantly different views, believed it their business to travel around the known world, telling people that there was another king, this Jesus. World mission is thus the first and most obvious feature of early Christian praxis. So there is sort of N.T. Wright's summary of the reception of Christianity into the Roman culture and why it was successful. Mission was at its heart, and they were willing to stand no matter what the cost. They took the Jewish God to the Roman and Greek worlds. And what was true for them was true for the whole world. All right, do you have questions or comments?
I have a question, Doctor.
Yes,
During
Rebecca?
this time, what we're looking at in the Roman world, were similar concept dynasties or areas outside of?
Your sound is cutting out.
Okay,
It's hard to hear you.
Okay, can you hear me now?
That's better.
Yes, I was curious about, because we've been understanding about what was happening in the Roman world in the Roman era, but can you hear me now, or is it still cutting out?
I can hear you better, yeah.
Okay, I'm curious what was happening if some of these schools of thought that we're learning about were also happening, or an awareness in some of like the Chinese dynasty or in other places that were empire. What were they, the schools of thought? Were they believing, had they heard of these concepts as well? Or was that just completely different?
I can't speak to that definitively, but I would think that this did not have an impact in the Oriental cultures like China, but that it was largely confined to the Roman Empire. I don't think that there was that much intermixing between the cultures. There was some trade between the cultures, but I don't think that there was a lot of cultural exchange, if we could call it that.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Any other questions or comments?
Doctor, I just want to ask.
All right, then let us,
Doctor, can I-
Romer?
yes, doctor. Analyzing what I've been discussing, it's quite not clear to me. Which features are, and what is this feature they think the most?
Romer, you're cutting out. Is it hard to understand for the rest of you?
It is hard for me
Can
too.
you hear me now, doctor? It's clear?
It's not clear. It's very, very choppy. But
Okay, doctor.
go ahead and try it again.
Yeah, I just want to ask Doctor, because you mentioned about the feature of the Roman Empire, and it's not quite clear to me which most contributed to the spread of Christianity during the time.
I didn't quite get the question. What is not clear?
Yeah, this feature of Roman Empire, doctor, which contributed to the spread of Christianity.
Okay, I know the question is about the spread of Christianity through the Roman Empire. I'm not sure what exactly it is, your question is, but Christianity spread actually quite quickly. If we look at that letter from Pliny to Trajan, we can see that Christianity was not only in the cities, but it was also in the villages. It was in the countryside. Pliny said that the temples were empty because of the spread of Christianity. Now, this was around, shortly after the year 100, within 20 years of the year 100. So Christianity spread very rapidly, even though it had a lot going against it. But the quality of the Christians' commitment, their belief, bedrock belief, their ministry to one another and building up and edifying one another in the faith, the fact that they were spirit-filled, all of this contributed to the spread of Christianity, and it spread very quickly throughout the Roman world.
Okay, doctor. So did this has an impact in the fall of the Roman Empire, doctor? The spread of Christianity,
Did it have an impact in what?
the fall of Roman Empire.
The fall of the Roman Empire. Well, there we're getting back a number of centuries, and it takes us really out of the New Testament era. So I know that there were a lot of things that contributed to the fall of the Roman Empire. And of course, Christianity by that time had become a legal religion. I would think that the presence of Christianity in the Roman Empire was not really a factor in that. But if it had been more genuinely Christian, maybe it wouldn't have fallen. That's just my opinion.
Thank you,
All
doctor.
right, thank you. Okay, let us go on. All right, and we're going to now go to textual criticism. I know that you've heard this concept talked about, but I don't know. Wait, I think I'm out of order here. We have another. Another short short section, tools for New Testament study. So let's do this first, and then we'll go to New Testament criticism. What are our tools? What tools, if we're going to study the New Testament, what are we going to need to use? First of all, Greek texts. And let me ask you, show me with a show of hands, how many of you have studied Greek? Can I see your hand? Okay, 1, 2. Okay, not many. When you do, these are going to be the texts that you will probably use. Now, they've come out in the last few years with some other texts, and that seem to be quite good, but these are the standard. The UBS 5th edition and the Nestle Aland 28th edition. All right, we will pause here. We'll take a 10-minute break, and we will be back in 10 minutes. Have a good one. All right. So the first tool, if you're going to use the Greek, would be a Greek New Testament. For those who don't have access to the Greek, an assortment of good translations would be tools that you would use to study any portion of Scripture, including the New Testament. This is a list that is given by Gordon Fee in his New Testament exegesis book, except that it's older and it has the TNIV instead of the NIV 2011. If that were published today, it would include the NIV 2011. And this is a nice range of different ones. I don't think Fee includes the ESV as well. Some of these are very literal translations. Some of them are more what we call dynamic equivalents. And it's good to read a passage in a number of translations so that you can see if there are any kind of major differences. If so, that would signal to you that there is something controversial there. And this is types of Bible translations. On the left side, word for word, or we would call that more literal equivalence. In the middle, thought for thought, which we would call dynamic equivalence. And on the right side, the paraphrase, So the farther to the left, the closer you get to the actual word order of the Greek and Hebrew. And the farther to the right, the farther from it you get. Notice the NIV is right pretty much in the middle. The ESV is more toward the left side, the more formal equivalents. And you know, you can't just translate from one language to another word for word. You have to rearrange perhaps the order of the words. You have to say things differently. Idioms are different in different languages. So this is just sort of an overview.
Dr. Galen,
Yes.
the Passion version, where would it fall?
You know, I don't know. And I've not used the Passion version. It's just come out recently. And actually what I've heard about it has not been very good in terms of reviews from academics. So I'll have to go and look at it in more detail, but I personally have not used it.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions or comments here? The most used in the world is the NIV. And the ESV came out as a revision of the Revised Standard Version in order to stem the tide toward women's equality, because the NIV is what we would call gender neutral or gender accurate. The same with the NRSV, the new RSV. And the ESV is pretty much goes along with the complementarian view on the equality of the sexes rather than the egalitarian view. And that shows up at times in its translation. So it's in a sense trying to stem the tide toward women's equality. That's the ESV. All right. Good Bible dictionaries. And here we just list a few. There are a lot of good Bible dictionaries, and these are probably the some of the top ones. But they keep coming out, and it's hard really to keep up with them. Also, specialized dictionaries, Dictionary of New Testament Background, Dictionary of Jesus and the Gospels. And this is a series that's put out by InterVarsity Press, which is really excellent. Also, a Dictionary of Biblical Imagery. Concordances give a listing of where words appear in the scripture. So if you want to look up, say, love, you go to that word and it will tell you what verses show or contain the word love. And Bible computer software has pretty much made concordances obsolete, because you can do so much in the way of searching. You can search not only words, you can search phrases, you can search where two words appear together in the same verse or where they don't appear together. It's just amazing what you can do with computer software. So it's sort of eliminated the need for concordances. Good exegetical commentaries. And here we give a list. There are many good exegetical commentaries out there. We could go into detail on each one of these. Some of them tend to be more liberal, some more conservative. The AYB right there at the top, Anchor Yale Bible, tends to be a little more on the liberal side. So does Hermeneia right under it. The ICC, International Critical Commentary, generally in years past was quite liberal. Now they're using quite a few conservative commentators. And the one at the bottom there, the NICNT, is one of the most popular commentary series. And so there are a lot to choose from. Now, somebody wrote me and asked, is it okay to use commentaries in your research papers? They asked, is it okay to use one commentary? And I said, you can use 100 commentaries if you want. Commentaries are good sources. So I would encourage you to use commentaries. There are specialized commentaries, the NIV Bible background commentary on the New Testament, and Bruce Metzger's textual commentary on the Greek New Testament. Computer Bible programs. Now, these are probably the three most popular, although BibleWorks has, they've stopped producing it. So basically we have Logos and Accordance. I use Logos and I would highly recommend it. The things that you can do with it is just amazing. And I could probably take a class period just showing what the Logos Bible software will do. But in terms of searching the Bible and searching other works, it has what is called a passage guide, and it will bring up, you put in a passage and it will bring up commentaries. It will bring up other works, how it was dealt with in the early church. Of course, you have to have those on your computer for them to be brought up, but it's just an amazing, amazing program. And you can download the basic program free, but then the things that you add to it do cost. Now, every month they offer a free book, and then they offer other ones. Like today, I got the email from them. They offered a commentary on Hebrews, I think it was. And so, of course, I said, download it to me. They also had another one for 99 cents and another one for $2.99, you know, that kind of thing. Most of them are much more expensive than that. And I'm not sure who that offer goes to. I know it goes to me, but I assume it goes to everyone, but I'm not sure. Many people prefer Accordance, and that is also a good program. Any questions or comments here so far? All right. Theological dictionaries. The first one, which is normally just referred to as Kittel, is 10 volumes. It's about a meter wide on the library shelf, probably the greatest linguistic work that's ever been done in the history of the world. It'll take words from the New Testament and look at them in terms of how it was used in the Old Testament, in the Septuagint, in Greek culture, in the New Testament, and then in the early church. And it's getting dated now. It started out in the 1930s and ended up in probably the 1980s, but it's a very valuable work. It's been abridged into a 1-volume work called, we call it Little Kittel. We also have the New International Dictionary of New Testament Theology and Exegesis, which is another good theological dictionary. There's also the New Dictionary of Biblical Theology. If you're able to use the Greek, the best Greek lexicon for the New Testament is Bauer, Greek English Lexicon of the New Testament and Other Christian Literature. And when I was teaching Greek 3, I told my students, get this lexicon. If you have to sell your firstborn to get the money to buy it, do it. Of course, that's a little overstating it. I'm joking, okay? But if you're going to be doing Greek exegesis, you're going to need Bauer. And it's available, like just about all of these are available digitally. So you can get it in Logos. And I have it set up so that I have the Greek New Testament in Logos. I double click on a word and it automatically brings it up in Bauer. And Louis-Nida, Greek English Lexicon of the New Testament based on semantic domains. And then we have an assortment of introductions. These are in your syllabus. There are a lot of New Testament introductions that are good. And you can just look this over. Ehrman comes from a quite liberal position. He is not a Christian, he is an agnostic. Donald Guthrie, an old standard, which is very good. Everett Harrison was my prof at Fuller. Johnson, Kummel. Kummel is quite liberal also, and a little bit older. Martin, New Testament Foundations. This has just been reissued, and I believe it's maybe has a new title now. I'd have to look into that. And then the latest one here is N.T. Wright and Michael Bird, The New Testament in Its World, an Introduction to the History, Literature, and Theology of the First Christians. It is about this thick. It's 900 and some pages. It's really too big to use for a course like this. but it's excellent and very valuable. If you're going to study the Gospels, you'll need a Gospel Parallels. And the one that I would recommend is the first one here on the list, Synopsis of the Four Gospels, Greek-English edition of the Synopsis Quatuor Evangelorum, which is the next one in the list. So on one page, it'll have Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John in columns on one text. Then on the right page, it has the Greek of the same thing. The bottom one here is all in English in the New Revised Standard Version. All right, those are some of the tools that you will need to use in not only your research papers, but also in your day-to-day ministry once you leave seminary. Do you have questions or comments here?
I have one question. Pearly
Yes.
is old, but I don't see Vine. Do you use?
Yeah, Vine is just pretty old. And I would encourage you to get something newer.
Okay, thank you.
Vine is pretty dated, yeah. Any other questions, comments about the tools that you're going to need to use? All right, let us go on then.
Sorry, Doctor.
Yes.
Yeah, just that reminds me something. Also, the e-sword. Yeah, it used to be so popular before, the e-sword. Yeah, is it
Yes.
still valid? Yeah?
Yes. The eSword is it's a free Bible software. So you might want to look at that. In fact, I probably should have put it. It is going to offer a lot of what we call public domain works, older works that are not charged, that they're no longer copyrighted. So you're not going to get the quality of resources in eSword, excuse me, that you would get in, say, for Logos, for example. Excuse me. But yes, and I appreciate that, Miles. I should have mentioned eSword. So you can go online, put in, I think it's e-sword, and you can try it, see how it's worth. It certainly is better than nothing. And if you don't have a Bible software, I would encourage you to give it a try.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Any other input here? I appreciate that, Miles. Okay, let's go to the textual criticism of the New Testament. Where did we get our New Testament? If I were to ask you, where did we get our New Testament? What would you say? Well, you say, well, I went down to the Christian bookstore and I bought it, right? But that's not what I mean. How did we come to have this book that we call the New Testament? And by the way, this on the screen here, this is John 3:16 in Codex B, Codex Vaticanus. The apostles just didn't go and sit down and write a book that they published, which they intended as sacred writings of the church until Jesus came back. It was a process. It happened under the leadership of the Holy Spirit, but it was one that I don't believe the church anticipated at the beginning. For example, I don't imagine that when the Apostle Paul wrote the book of 1 Corinthians, that he was thinking in terms of this book, this letter, being copied and read by you and me 2,000 years later. He did recognize that he was writing with apostolic authority. So what he wrote was authoritative. And yet I don't think that he had the faintest clue of what would eventuate into the New Testament. Let us take, for example, the letter of Paul to the Colossians. How did that letter end up in the New Testament? We don't have the original writings, which we call the autographs, that actual handwriting of the Apostle Paul or of any New Testament book. Now, let me give this a try again and see if I can get this to work. Okay, maybe I can use the mouse. Okay, I'll make a little circle here. And that is Paul's epistle to the Colossians. He sends that to them. He tells them to, when they're done reading it, have the people in Laodicea read it. And then when they have read their letter that he's written, that the Colossians should read the letter to the Laodiceans. Now, somebody then takes that letter and they make a copy. So now we have the original and we have two copies. That then gets copied again, and these copies have other copies, and that process goes on and on and on, so that when you come down a few centuries later, we have many copies of the book of Colossians. For us, the issue is that when these copies are made, mistakes creep in. So with each copy, there is a chance for mistakes. And that's because we're simply human. Many times we don't try to make mistakes, but it happens. And I know that you see it when you try to copy something. And I see it when I grade research papers, that there are repetitions, there are words that have been omitted, and that kind of thing. And by the way, we don't have all the letters that Paul wrote. We know of 4 letters that he wrote to Corinth, but we only have 2. There were 2 others. So textual criticism is the process of getting back as far as we can to the original writing. It's been defined this way. And let me see if I can get this to go on. Tell you what, I'm going to have to probably erase. Okay. Okay. Here's a definition of textual criticism. The study of the manuscript evidence for a written work of which the original is no longer extant, with the intent to discern the original text. So this is referring to manuscripts, what is handwritten. Of course, they didn't have the publishing press back in those days. So we are dealing with handwritten manuscripts. Paleography is a study of the science of ancient writings, and that comes in here. Let's first of all look at the materials that they used. Almost all the earlier manuscripts were made of parchment. First it was papyrus and then parchment. Papyrus was a plant that grew plentifully along the Nile River. In fact, in Job 8:11, it says, "Can papyrus grow tall where there is no marsh?" It grew to be about somewhere between 3 and 5 meters high and almost 3 inches wide. It was cut into sections, which is about a foot long, about a third of a meter. The sections were split open, and the pith on the inside, that material on the inside, was cut into strips. Now, the Greek word for this pith, this stuff that was inside the reed, is the word biblos. You might recognize that word. These strips were placed on a flat surface with all the fibers running in the same direction. And then on top of that, there was another group of fibers put on going in the opposite direction. So you have one going in one direction and the other going in the opposite direction. And it produced a very strong sheet. The finished product then was very strong, and papyrus was used for around 3,500 years. That was the major writing material. The word biblos referred to the papyrus plant, and then it came to mean scroll or book. Its diminutive is the word biblion, and it referred to a strip of papyrus and came to refer, like biblos, to the scroll or codex. The plural of biblion is the word biblia. Have any of you heard that word before? Biblia?
Yeah. Yes, in Spanish.
All right. It is Spanish. It is also, I believe, Tagalog for Bible. Biblia was transferred to Latin as a singular, and that is where we get the word Bible. Beginning around the first part of the 4th century, manuscripts came to be written on parchment. Parchment was more durable and could easily be written on both sides. The process of making parchment was perfected at Pergamum. In fact, the word parchment comes from the word for Pergamum. It was made from the skins of young cattle, sheep, goats, or antelope. It was not just leather, but it was a high quality of leather. It is said that it took the skins of 90 animals to make one parchment copy of the Bible. That means that it would be very expensive to have a copy of even part of the New Testament. It's been estimated that just for Paul's 13 letters, the cost would be $10,129 US to make a copy on parchment of Paul's 13 letters. Vellum was the finest quality of extra thin parchment. The younger the animal, the better the quality of the material. And some parchment was made from unborn animals, animals that had not even been born yet. Later deluxe editions had dyes of purple and yellow and red. Ordinary editions were written with black or brown ink with decorative headings, usually in red, but sometimes in yellow and blue. Now, eventually the words parchment and vellum came to mean the same thing, or synonymously, I should say. In the late Middle Ages, paper was introduced, which was made of cotton, hemp, or flax. The pens that scribes used were made of a thin reed sharpened to a point with a split in the middle. Now, when I was in elementary school, in our desks, we had a hole about like, can you see me? About like this. And in the hole, there was a little bottle with ink in it, liquid ink. And then we were given pens with a metal tip, and the pen itself was wooden. And you would dip the pen in the inkwell and then write on your paper that way. And it was really neat because if you pressed hard, that split would open up and you could write double. So it was sort of fun. It was sort of like going back to the Middle Ages because where I had gone to school, you know, we would use ballpoint pens or pencils. And then I moved up to Akron, Ohio, and we were using these kinds of things like the scribes of the New Testament used. The ink that the scribes used was made of soot and gum and water. Okay, any questions about the materials that they used? Okay, let's look at the form of books. We first of all had the scroll. The papyrus roll or scroll was made by gluing together side by side separate sheets of papyrus and then winding them around a stick. Now, the maximum length was usually about 11 meters. So you could make a scroll up to about 11 meters long. Both Luke and Acts would fill a scroll somewhere between 9 and 10 meters. And perhaps that's one reason that Luke made a 2-volume work. Luke on one scroll and Acts on a second scroll. The columns that they wrote in were about 2.5 to 3.5 inches wide. Sometimes, though not very often, they would write on both sides of the scroll, not only the inside, but then turn it over and write on the outside as well. In Revelation 5:1, it says, "Then I saw in the right hand of him who sat on the throne a scroll with writing on both sides and sealed with 7 seals." So this scroll was there, had writing on both sides, which is like some scrolls were done in New Testament times. And then we have the Codex. It was hard to use a scroll, especially if you wanted to look up a specific passage. I mean, just think of having to unwind this scroll and, you know, get to Isaiah 61, for example. It would take some work. Early in the 2nd century, the Codex, or the leaf form of book, began to be used. It was made by taking a sheet of papyrus and placing on top of it another sheet, and on top of it another sheet, and then you could fold it in the middle and sew it down the middle, and you would have a book like we have today. Or you could take a stack of pieces of papyrus and sew it down one side. You could get a lot more in a codex than a scroll. In fact, you could get the entire Old Testament and New Testament in a single codex. And some of the manuscripts that we have today originally had the whole Old Testament and whole New Testament. It was also easier to use a codex than a scroll. So that made it convenient looking up Old Testament and New Testament passages. It was also less expensive to make a codex than a scroll. The church adopted the use of the codex early on. So this was one of the things that distinguished the synagogue from the church. The synagogue continued to use the scroll. The church used the codex. So the early church was high tech. They adopted the codex before the Greco-Roman culture at large did. So they were on the cutting edge of technology there in the first centuries of the church. There are 172 manuscripts or fragments before the year 8400. Of them, 158 are in codices and 14 are on scrolls. Questions or comments here? All right. The copying process. Copies were made word for word by hand. Manuscripts were copied in one of two ways. First of all, an individual could take a manuscript and then have a blank codex and copy looking from one to the other, just the way we would copy from a book onto sheets of paper. Or it could be that a group of scribes would sit in one room. One person would read the scripture, and the others, multiple people, would write them down. At first, the copies were made by those who were interested. In the ancient world, there was a trade of professional scribes, people who did this kind of thing as a profession. The church, however, at first did not have access to that, although by the 4th century, generally professional scribes were used. Excuse me. So several scribes would sit in a room, and one person would read while they each wrote down on their manuscript what was said. Now, errors could occur. Someone might cough, and it would make it difficult to understand what word was said at that time. Some words were different words, but with the same pronunciation. So which one is meant? Sometimes the scribes would put the words in the wrong order. After the copies were made, then they would be gone over by a corrector to make sure that they were correct. Now, sometimes the monks, medieval Catholic monks, would sit in their cell and do the copying by themselves. And they used this process. First of all, you read it to yourself, you retain the material in your memory, then dictate the material again to yourself, and then you write it. Now, until the early Middle Ages, it was customary for scribes to stand and write for brief notes. For longer writings, they would sit on a stool or a bench or on the ground with the writing material on their knees. Now, you can see they would get very tired doing this. It wasn't as easy as sitting in a chair at a desk the way we do today. And here's a picture of how an ancient scribe would do his copying. This process continued until the time of the Middle Ages. There are two kinds of Greek writing styles that concern us. The first is called uncials or majuscules. Uncials are modification of capitals with more curves, and for us it would be like writing in English in capital letters. Minuscules was a special form of cursive writing, not writing in capital letters, but writing more like our handwriting today, our cursive. It was quicker, and more could be written on a page, and it was less expensive to produce with this kind of script. It came to be used at the close of the 8th or the beginning of the 9th century. Now, we should note here that in the original Greek manuscripts, there was no division of words. Words were written with no breaks between them. Also, there was very little in the way of punctuation, very little in the way of commas, periods, exclamation points, question marks, and that kind of thing. Neither was there chapter and verse divisions. So, we have chapter and verses today, but originally they didn't have that. The chapter divisions that we have today was made by a man by the name of Stephen Langdon in the 13th century. And the first Greek New Testament with verse divisions was published in 1551. And the verse division were developed by Robert Stephanus. And those are the verse divisions that we use today. Now, Stephanus' son said that he did the verse divisions on the road between Paris and Lyon. And some people have envisioned Robert Stephanus riding on his horse, doing verse divisions as he rode on his horse. And if they disagreed with the verse division, they would say, well, what can you expect? He was on a horse doing this. Well, it wasn't really. Probably what it meant was at the ends, in the evenings, was when he did the verse divisions. All right, our time is up. We will stop here. We will take up here next time. God bless you, and we will see you on Friday morning.
Thank you, Dr.
Thank
Gail.
you, Doctor.
Thank you,
Thank you,
sir.
Doctor. God bless.